My ultimate takeaway here is that the VA really was the problem child of its time, whereas the VB is a WRX that went off to college and became a functioning member of society. Because even down to the most minor of details, this car has a very adventurous personality. It feels on edge. It feels like a car that is constantly wanting to go. The VB, on the other hand, is a more matured car, and you feel that. And that's mostly because of the change of platform, the change of engine, but also to get that personality, you need to modify the VB. You need to draw that power and draw that personality out. Hey everyone, and welcome back or welcome to the channel. It's official. I've hit 5,000 miles with my Subaru WRX, and I've also owned it exactly 6 months to the day, and it has been a very enjoyable experience. But that is not going to be the topic for today's video. Another VB WRX owner, which you guys have probably already subscribed to him, Auto Enthusiast, posed the question, if the Subaru WRX is becoming a dad car. Now, I have a completely different perspective with the WRX and whether it is aging, and for people like me who are in my 30s. I think what Subaru did with the VB, having driven the VA very recently, they've aged it up. Not only is the WRX now appealing to people who are in their 30s and 40s who grew up with Gran Turismo and Need for Speed, but what they've also done, like many other manufacturers right now in the 2020s, they've made the VB generation WRX for an older crowd, but also for someone who's not looking for the sportiest and most aggressive experience. In my video where I had driven the VA, I said that had I known how to drive stick 2 or 3 years ago, I would have not purchased a WRX. And I am going to stand by that statement because I didn't mention this in the video, but the VA kind of embodies everything I don't like in a JDM car. This might surprise you, I didn't grow up liking Japanese cars at all, despite the fact that I actually wanted an R32 as my first car ever because that was the first car I purchased in Gran Turismo. But I grew up wanting Euro cars. My dream car is an E39 M5, and even the vehicles I'm looking at today to supplement the WRX would be a BMW Z3, Porsche Boxster, Porsche 911. So how does somebody who likes Euro cars end up behind the wheel of a WRX and actually love daily driving it? I think that's the beauty of Subaru's global platform. But WRX owners and purists might actually not like me saying that. As somebody looking at this from the outside, and someone who has no deep connections to the WRXs from the 2000s all the way up to 2020, I look at the WRX as being more grown up, more mature, but it still has the same attributes as its predecessors. Of course, you have the quad exhaust tips, and even though you have the plastic cladding, you still have that traditional WRX body lines and aggressive look. Although one thing I do want to get into at some point in a future video is that the wagon that everyone wants here in America that's now going to be sold in Mexico and is already sold in Australia and New Zealand only has dual exhaust outlets, and from what I've read and what I've watched from reviews over in Australia, it's a softer car, making me question whether Subaru is trying to soften up the WRX at all while still keeping its persona that is true to the WRX nameplate. You still have the signature hood scoop, you also have that great Turbo 4 under the hood, and the 6-speed manual. Out of the box, you look at this car and say, okay, it looks like a WRX, it feels like a WRX, but as I've talked about before with this engine, Subaru played it very safe. Not only with the engine, but also I think the styling as well. They left everything up to the owner's discretion. And that's why I think the WRX is appealing to a completely different demographic, but also a completely different buyer, someone like me who never owned a WRX in the past. And this all leads me to the suspension of the WRX, because when you cross-shop it with the Volkswagen GTI, Honda Civic Si, Integra A-Spec with the manual, and I think even the Elantra N, the VB has one of the most stiffest and rigid chassis out of all of them. But when you drive a VA, and drive a VA back-to-back with a VB, the VA makes the VB feel very soft. And this has been something I've been reflecting on the last 2 weeks, because driving the VA has had a profound effect on how I look at my WRX, and it's definitely changed my perspective on this car. Because for me, an ideal daily driver would be an Audi S4 or a BMW M340i. That would be my style of driving, if I didn't want to go all out for an M3 or M4. But the WRX with the VB gives me some of those characteristics and qualities. Obviously, it's still a Japanese car at the end of the day with the lighter steering, but the way the suspension is, the way it's set up without having the adaptive dampers, this to me is exactly how I want to drive. And I now feel like with the VB, I got one heck of a deal at $35,000, because with an Audi S4, I'd have to spend $60,000. So to me, it's a financial value, and really, I think a great option if you're somebody who wants to own a German car, but can't, because you can't go all out for a $60,000 vehicle. Now, I know a lot of WRX owners who've owned the Bug Eye, the Stink Eye, are probably gonna say, that is not what I wanna hear from you at all. But I think understanding the disconnect between WRX owners of the past and why they don't want to hop into a VB becomes very clear once you start experiencing the prior generations. And again, this is still a WRX at the end of the day. It's still true to the WRX nameplate. But because it's so suitable for somebody who does have a family, who is in their 30s and 40s, who doesn't want a car that makes them almost feel a bit ashamed to drive it, because with an older generation WRX, really you own one of those in your 20s, maybe your mid-20s. Whereas with this, you can drive it around and it becomes a suitable car at a different stage in your life. And while I wouldn't go as far to say that the WRX is a dadmobile, a vehicle for a guy older in life that does have kids, I would feel very comfortable driving this car on a daily basis if I had a family of my own. So that is one thing that I've begun to notice, not only with the WRX, but other JDM cars as well. They're all starting to age upwards. It really comes back to the platform. It comes back to the chassis. Subaru's global platform is so refined that it can draw in somebody who is much older in life, who never owned a car like this before, much like myself. But it's also the driving environment and the interior that plays a significant role in how the VB compares to the VA in earlier generations. Because even though you have hard touch plastics on the dashboard, you have the large infotainment system, the seat positioning tells you a completely different story, because it's easy to hop in and out of this car. Whereas with the VA, you feel closer to the chassis and the suspension, and it feels like a traditional sports sedan, as opposed to the VB, which, since it is higher up off the ground, since they lifted the suspension, it almost feels like it's trying to blur the lines between being a crossover and sedan. And again, it's not a bad thing at all, because I think a lot of people who are hopping into this car are perfectly fine with that. Whereas people who want to get that WRX experience, you will have to modify this car, and Subaru left it up to the aftermarket, which I think was smart. Mostly because the way they engineered the VB, a lot of people who are drawn into this generation might not modify it at all. And for those who are traditional WRX owners that are now hopping into another generation, who want to do the exact same thing to the VB that they had with the VA, they can modify this car to their heart's content. So it really is the best of both worlds, and I wouldn't look at the VB in a negative light. It's just a completely different experience, but an experience that is aged up, more mature, for somebody who has grown up with the WRX, wants to still own a WRX, but doesn't want to have the aggressive driving experience that they had in prior generations. And while that may seem counterintuitive from Subaru's perspective, it's actually been a benefit to them, because they've been able to give you a car with a lot of potential with this chassis, platform, and engine, while also giving buyers who are new to this platform a car they can really enjoy, but also a car that can go head-to-head with an Elantra N or Civic Si. And that is something that they might not have had in the past. And in my mind, this car was designed to take over this segment. And when you take a look at the sales figures, they're definitely doing that over the last 3 years. They have taken over quite a lot of market share compared to Honda, Toyota, Volkswagen, and Hyundai. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like, comment, share, and subscribe for more. Also, let me know in the comment section below what you guys have been noticing with your VB, because as time has gone on, I've noticed a few things I definitely want to change, and I feel compelled to change, such as with a louder exhaust, but also maybe even play around with the suspension a bit, lower the car, give it more of that sportier feel without compromising the softer suspension that we have here with the VB generation. But I personally think, though, that with the WRX, it is more aged up. Whether that's a good thing or bad thing, whether young people are still buying this car or not, I just think that what Subaru has done here with the VB is actually a positive at the end of the day, but also I think it makes this car so much better than it was before.